Yeah. For those who do know me. And yeah, I've been a busy boy today doing remote video assessments and answering many technical questions. But it's been a busy day. It's all good. How about yourself, Sam? You had a good day?
Yeah, it's busy. Mondays tend to be busy. I think we've had over 400 calls on the helpline today. So yeah, it's been busy. Lots of EICRs, lots of PRS work.
Yeah.
So yeah, just there's a few people joined. So joined tonight by Dan Smith, one of our area engineers down in the London area. So hopefully we'll be talking you through some of the questions and answers tonight. So
excuse the hat tonight, Sam, as well. I haven't had a haircut since October, so hence why I normally haven't got a hat, but yeah. I need it because my hair's just wild at the moment.
I think there's a few. I heard on the radio somebody saying about I think it's either in Wales or Scotland, one of them that has opened up a little bit. I think it's Wales. You're allowed to get a haircut now. So yeah, I was thinking about those people that are just over the border.
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll kick off tonight with the question of the week that we posted out on Friday. So the question of the week was, to comply with BS 7671, do the metal fixing screws of a plastic light switch need to be earthed for protection against electric shock? So what are your thoughts on that one, Dan?
Okay, so I think at first a lot of people think they can be earthed anyway through a metal back box. But I think we're actually going from the angle of a plastic back box and how the screws can still be classed as an exposed conductive part, as they can become live under fault conditions. So in that instance, actually no, even though they're an exposed conductive part, regulation 410.3.9 indent 3 will refer down only into its size of being below 50 mil by 50 mil, that you can omit fault current protection. So.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll just flash over a screen for somebody. So as Dan rightly says, that's all covered within regulation 410.3.9. That although they are exposed conductive parts, it's not actually a requirement, because perceived risk is that you're not going to have a grip or you're not going to come into significant contact with them. So yeah, and few people, Mr. Sadler, spot on in the chat with 410.3.9. So I have to admit, it's one of those ones that until someone showed me, I wasn't aware of it, and so it's one of those ones that I think a lot of people, until you see it or until you're shown it, you think, okay, yeah, it makes sense. So yeah, a good one. And just slightly following on from that, then would be. So the situation on an existing installation, somebody doing a condition report and coming across a situation where, again, they've got plastic back box perhaps, but definitely plastic faceplate and no CPC. What code would we give it? Classification code. And the general guidance is that on the basis that it's a plastic switch plate, no CPC would be recommended as a C3, on the basis that you're not likely to get an electric shock, even due to the screws being inaccessible or small enough so that you can't grip or have major contact. We would recommend a warning label at the board to make people aware, so that in the future they don't change that class 2 switch plate for a class 1 item and then introduce a potential hazard. Okay, so that was the question of the week and a bit of a follow-up. We did also have another question about maximum demand. So when producing a certificate for an addition to an existing installation, do I record the DNO fuse rating as the maximum demand? What's your thoughts on that, Dan?
So I get this quite a lot, Sam, when I review installation certs or drawing assessments. So you'll ask yourself the question, if you did record the fuse size itself, why is the box even there? Because you know what the fuse is going to be. So really, when looking at maximum demand, we're referring to Part 3 of the regs, assessment of general characteristics. And when you think about what is the existing load in the property itself or the installation, and what are you adding to it? and is that collectively going to be, overloading the actual fuse size itself? And if it is, then obviously they can seek other means. But you're gauging basically what you think realistically. I mean, there's lots of guidance in the on-site guides and the IT publications about applying diversity for different types of circuits. But you basically see, am I going to be overloading that fuse size? So no, it shouldn't be the same size as the fuse. It should be with diversity taken into account. Now, I often use, for dwellings in particular, I always use Christmas Day as an example. I think, well, if you've got electric hob, you might have a few hobs on the go. You might have someone up in the shower using an electric shower. Some might be making a cup of tea with the kettle. Realistically, what is all that going to come to? So, yeah, basically, no is the answer to that, short and sweet.
Yeah. It's, as you said, it's there for a specific reason, isn't it? And the key thing is we've got to really, it's like a sanity check. It forces us to think, okay, I'm going to make some additions. Is what's already there suitable for coping with those additions? In particular, the supplies, the distribution network supply cable. So yeah, it should be based on actual load. Okay, looking in the chat, we've got a question. First one I can see that's come in talks about 2 different supplies and 2 simultaneously accessible earthing arrangements. Okay, so regulations do tell us that if we have got 2 different earthing arrangements and the installation is such that they can't be separated, so you've got a situation where standing in one location it is possible to access the 2 different earthing arrangements, then you're going to be the conductor between those possible potential differences, in particular when one system is under fault. So yeah, we would suggest that that's potentially dangerous under fault conditions, admittedly hopefully for a short time until the protective measure clears the fault in whichever system it is under fault. But yeah, a potential hazard there. So we would, I think, initially be looking at a C2, because the answer would be to connect the 2 earthing arrangements together. So the 2 METs, connect them together, sized based on the most onerous, so that effectively you've created a single equipotential zone. Now there shouldn't be any major potential differences. You might still get your bonding magnitude allow you to limit that potential touch voltage, but it should only be for a short time until the protective device clears. But yeah, if there's no joint, I think we would look at a C2. What would you say about that, Dan?
Yeah, I mean, it depends what the installation is. I don't think if it said what type of installation it was commercial or industrial. But a lot of the time it's fortuitously together anyway, if you've got any common bonding metalwork, for example. So you might actually find it is actually at the same potential. But a thing just to add from that really is that the size of, if you were to join them, would have to take, obviously the worst case scenario, fault currents, obviously. It should be sized accordingly if you are going to be joining the 2 earth systems together.
Yeah, because you're absolutely right. It does depend. We do get the question. It tends to be a follow-up sometimes for when they've knocked a larger building into one, for example. Yeah. They're doing some major refurbs, and there's a supply at one end and a supply at the other end. So it does come across as a fair few times. Okay, looking elsewhere in the chat room. Gas earth bonding. If there's a flat on the 3rd floor and the meter, can we put bonding clamp when copper pipes come into the flat instead of near the gas meter? Okay, so it's quite a wide question, that one, because it depends very much on how the electrical installation's laid out. So is it a single installation, or does each flat have their own D&O cut out, and also about the gas arrangement. So if we take perhaps the simpler approach, where we have got a single electrical installation and then it's distributed to the flats, we should really be doing our main bonding at the point of entry of that gas, which will typically be at the origin of the electrical installation as well. So if we main bond there, then that's the best position, and that's what BS 7671 tells us, where practical, best to bond it within 600 mil of that point of entry. because that's going to be the best place for bonding it. So that's what I'd say. It does depend a little bit if we've got effectively multiple supplies. Each flat, if we go old school back to sort of 60s and 70s, got their own D&O cutout, then you need to treat them individually, and then your bonding perhaps would be done more often in the flats itself. But yeah, quite an interesting question, and needs a little bit more information just to clarify it. Or any additions that you'd make to that?
No, I think you covered it. I mean, the first question I had was: is it a common supply? Is it multiple individual supplies? And what's the arrangement set up? And I think to know a bit more about that will help narrow down, sort of suitable, correct answer really for it. But I think, generally what you're saying there, to be fair, Sam, I totally agree with.
Okay, another one looking in the flat in the chat. I got a shower. It's on a 45 amp double pole switch, but the switch is downstairs. What code would this be? Well, it's actually interesting. We'll hold that one because we've got. No, we can actually talk about it, I think. So if we roll that in with, we've got another one that we were going to pick on if we didn't have questions in the chat. But this one's quite common as well. It's very, very similar. Where it talks about does a domestic bathroom fan isolator used for mechanical maintenance need to be located adjacent to the fan? So we'll roll those two together. So does our 45 amp double pole switch need to be in the bathroom, or can it be downstairs? What's your thoughts on that, Dan?
I mean, like for mechanical maintenance, for example, there is no requirement for it to be local. But again, you have to consider though suitable labelling, identification. So it's not local. Can you easily locate it and identify that particular circuit?
Yeah, it's fair to say that the regulations tell us that every item of equipment, every circuit, every installation needs a means of isolation, but it doesn't tell us exactly where to put it. It talks about it should be suitably placed to prevent or remove danger. So again, it comes down to our friendly old risk assessment that, normally we would think about things that have got rotating parts, things that generate heat. You might want to consider a local means of isolation. But if we've got a safe thing, electric shower, I think if installed properly would be safe. Our white goods, our appliances in the kitchen installed properly would be safe. And so therefore you could think about a remote means of isolation, because the hazard is less. But then, like you say, you need to think of, well, if we've got mechanical maintenance, because now maybe it's a fan or something else with moving parts. If it is remote, we want to label it, because it's not going to be visually associated with the item, and we want to make sure that nobody's going to unintentionally re-energize it. So we need to be able to lock it in that off position as well, because I've had the situation where someone's working on the light at the top of the stairs. Homeowner comes in, all the lights are off, goes to the fuse board because they know what they're doing, and turns it back on because it hasn't been locked off. So always make sure that we can lock off if your means of isolation is remote. Let's see what else we've got. I've got to show it's on a 45. Yeah, we did this. Do we think the PRS deadline will be extended? Just as a little bit of a side, I think we get that every week, and fair play to whoever is asking it. We ask the government agency frequently. We were surprised, surprised maybe the wrong word, but when we came back after Christmas, we thought if they're going to extend it, they're going to extend it now. They absolutely said no. So no, we're not aware of any extension. That's the 1st of April was the deadline for existing tenants. So as far as we're aware, our advice that we're giving on the phone is that if for whatever reason you're doing everything you possibly can, and then speak to your local authority, because they're the ones who will ultimately police it. Let's have a look what else we've got. What code would you recommend for an SWA cable not buried to 600mm? It's visible out of the ground in places. So yeah, 600 mil is guidance that's given, if it's likely to be disturbed. But really, you've got to think, okay, a little bit of a risk assessment. It could perhaps be improved, but is it showing signs of damage? Is it presenting danger to the users of that installation? So where is it? And so you look at things like, if it is SWA, the sheath's still intact, so it's not showing any signs of danger. Maybe you might be concerned about stress being put on it if it was exposed so much that people could catch in it and passing traffic. But yeah, not necessarily consider it dangerous based on it just being visible and not 600 mil. But need a little bit more information about its location there and just how far down you would need to go to ensure that it's not going to present danger to the users of the installation. Anything you'd add to that, Dan? Or
yeah, no, I think like anything, everything's a lot of it's done on risk assessments. You're looking for signs of damage to the sheath, signs of damage to the cable itself. And you're using that information that you can see in front of you, to gather the level of risk there. Is how the cable's run in that particular instance. Is there signs of that it has been damaged? So then therefore there is obviously a sign of risk. So you're looking at more of a visual check along its run as well. But as I say, it's visual. It's an armoured cable via the obviously armour's earth as well. Yeah. Again, it's very much of a risk assessment. You are sort of basing on, the evidence that you can see from the cable itself.
We've got another question in the chat. So, are 16 mil consumer unit tails on a TNCS C3, depending upon which part of BBB, best practice, I don't know, a BBB you read, depends on what it recommends for correct setup. Can you clarify? So, well, 16mm tails, it would obviously depend very much on the rating of the fuse in the DNO cutout. But yeah, if we were looking at, if let's say it was a 100 amp fuse, obviously 16mm tails, even clip direct, won't carry 100 amps. But also consider the load itself. So our regs, our standard tells us we can admit overload protection if we can ensure that the load itself won't ever pull. So I was talking to someone, hopefully it's not the same person, but it might be. I was talking to someone, I think today, if I remember rightly, and they were saying that yeah, they had 16mm tails, but it was a very small, one bed flat, no heating, no electric cooking, no electric shower, so basically just some lighting and sockets. And so he agreed that there's no way that the load could exceed the current carrying capacity of the cable, and so that way we're using the DNO fuse for fault protection of the cable, but we're relying on the load itself for overload protection, and that's perfectly acceptable. It's exactly what we do on a 2.5mm spur on a ring. Yeah, we're not relying on the 32 amp protection for overload of that spur, because that cable won't carry 32 amps, but we're relying on the load, i.e. you can only plug one 13 amp device, or if it's a double socket, two 13 amp devices, and the 2.5mm cable will cope with that. So you can rely on the load, but you would need to document that so that people know in the future, okay, now I'm going to add the load, now that affects my maximum demand. It looks like we don't just throw these question and answers together, they all follow. So now it's becoming important to someone, okay, now I can't rely on the load because I'm exceeding the load, so now I need to put in my own protection. So hopefully that gives you some ideas there. Look at the DNO fuse rating. If the DNO fuse rating is greater than the current carrying capacity of the cable, then you've got to look at, is the load going to be able to ensure. Let's have a look what else we've got.
Also, Sam, as well.
Yeah, sorry.
You can also look for signs of thermal damage. Is there signs that the cable has been overloaded? Is there discoloration? Can you see that? Again, these are all things, again, based on the risk assessment that you're doing. You're looking very visual. What is in front of you? What is the evidence in front of you? Is there evidence that it has been overloaded in the past? Again, that might sway your decision as well.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's a very good shout. So again, you've got your inspector's hat on, you're asking them, okay, well, how long has it been like this? How often has it been used? And like you say, if it was being overloaded, we would see evidence of thermal damage on the cable. Okay, let's have a look at what else we've got in there. Is there a maximum value for R2 on a method 2 test? Okay, interesting, because there's no real maximum value for R2, because we're really looking, if we're looking at a typical protective device, it's really the R1 plus R2 value. So that's the key thing that defines the disconnection, that we're going to meet the disconnection time of the protective device. So I think R2 wise, it's really just a sanity check. You know, you're looking at, based on the size of your protective conductor, you're estimating the run route, and so you're estimating the length of run. Then you should be able to come up with what you believe your values should be. So if you find out either from site guide or manufacturer's data what your milliohms per meter are, and then multiply it by the length of run in meters, give or take a bit of tolerance, because you're not going to know exactly the way the cable's been run. That should give you a value. Then you've got to look at the accuracy of your meter, because you'll be down the bottom end of your continuity scale. That's not going to be the most accurate scale on the meter. So yeah, that would be a thing. I think, you know, I always refer to it as a bit of a sanity check. There's no value, there's no threshold that it has to meet, because it will be circuit dependent. Anything you'd add to that, Dan?
No, I was about to say, use the table in the back. I think the on-site guide is a great table, doesn't it? We've got some milliohms per meter. Sanity check, as you say, you know, you're looking at, you know, is it how long is the run? You know, they basically, you know, quick estimation more than anything. It's not going to be exact. You say you are going to have, you know, termination resistance and stuff as well, aren't you, as well? So I think, yeah, and the meters, they do tend to error the lower the value is, obviously, on the ohmic value on the continuity testing. So you've got to factor that in as well. But it's more as they sanity check, as estimation. It's the best way to look at it. And, you know, if it doesn't seem right, then you might want to investigate a bit further. But I think, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, we've got another one. Having to extend meter tails over 3 meters in a domestic property from garage intake location to a cupboard in the property. Cables to be run in the ceiling void from garage and then surface mounted down the wall to the fuse board. Can this be double insulated tails with an earth conductor? Possibly. You would need to consider the environment. So double insulated tails, double insulation obviously give you a recognised method of protection against electric shock, but don't give you, for example, as good mechanical protection of the internal conductors as something like SWA would be. So certainly on the surface they'd be suitable, because the surface would be seen as making them visible, so less likely to be mechanically damaged. But yeah, it would just be around the ceiling void. If we're looking at a typical domestic ceiling void, it tends to be a pretty clean environment. So long as we prepare our run properly, so that the double insulation isn't likely to be damaged while the cables are being installed, then it's a strong possibility. I wouldn't like to say a blanket yes, but you know, I'd be very surprised if they weren't suitable. I think the biggest thing you've got to look at is also overcurrent protection. So now, because we're going beyond 3 meters, our experience is that the DNO won't allow you to use their cutout fuse for overload protection. So you're perhaps going to have to consider your own means of overload on those extended tails. And again, if you're going to use double insulation, run them in such a route or in such a method that they're not likely to be mechanically damaged. And I think if you are going in the ceiling void, you've got to look at, you know, are people going to be putting anything to the ceiling? Are people going to be putting anything to the floor above? So, you know, look at things like carpet grip, anything that's going to puncture that upstairs ceiling, and make sure you're a good distance below that to minimise the possible impact of your cable. Anything you'd add to that, Dan?
Yeah, I think you always err on the side of caution whenever you want to consider running meter tails in the building fabric, because then you might come into the RCD territory, which again is going to be non-performance, because you're probably going to have 30 million upstream RCD on the whole insulation, and then how can you guarantee your 30% RCD leaves the whole insulation? Is very unlikely. So I think just risk assessment again. Look at the insulation itself. Does it need to be go through building fabric itself? But if it doesn't, I would always try and avoid it if possible, because as I say, you've got to think about what the chances are of that cable being penetrated by the means. So
yeah, there's always a voice in my head that says, double insulated tails aren't really meant to be run long distances in a non-clean environment. They really are designed for that little loop, metre and a half between the head and the consumer unit. So yeah, although it's possible, really consider, and maybe even consider about giving them some additional mechanical protection, and then I think a lot of people would think, yeah, no issues at all.
Yeah, if it was in like an earth steel conduit or something like that, that's the way I think you'd probably be thinking if you had to.
Yeah. Okay, let's have a look at another one. So we said here when TNS single phase with an additional buzz bar cutout, one phase feeding ground floor flat and one. So TNS. One phase with an additional buzz bar cutout, one phase feeding ground floor flat and one feeding the riser going upstairs to a separate flat. Are there any safety questions that the DNO should look into? So I'm not sure whether you meant it was more than one phase, so because otherwise I don't understand the question. If you've got one phase feeding ground floor and one feeding the riser, if they're both the same phase, absolutely no issues. If you've got two phases, again, no issues. And it used to be the old days that if we had voltages capable of being around, we'd put warning labels on enclosures. So three phase, we could potentially have 400 volts between phases. That requirement was actually reduced, and so there was a subtle change that we only have to notify if the voltage to earth is greater than 230. And so even with two phases, the UO, the voltage to earth, is still 230 between each phase. So there's no requirement to fit warning labels. If it's not obvious, it's not a bad idea to let people know that it is two separate phases, because they'd need to consider it when they're looking at things like isolating that enclosure, because you might have to go to more than one point. But yeah, I mean, if you think about it, every three-phase board, we don't put warnings all over it to say warning, three-phase. So it's not a particular requirement, and it's certainly no longer a specific requirement for voltages over 230. Anything you'd add on that, Dan?
No, I think as you said, when they made the change in 514, and they said nominal voltage, a UO to earth is the same for single phase and three phase. You still need 230 volts. Anything 39095, obviously, pull the voltage back and changed. Otherwise, it was 240. But yeah, they just say it's still the same. I think it's good practice. Always information is key. Informing other people after you considers others as well. Again, it's more good practice, I think, but it's not actually a regulation requirement.
Yeah. One question that we were getting at one time an awful lot, but I haven't been asked it for a long while, but we'll bring it up because it's obviously of interest. Received ZS values different. He's got before the RCD and after the RCD. They're measuring different ZS values, and this particular engineer has said that he's seeing an increase of about 0.45. Any idea why? With this, ZS equals ZE plus R1 plus 2 not met. Okay, so yeah, it was something. It's manufacturer specific, and it is a little bit of an impedance increase just across the RCD, and you can demonstrate that by showing yourself that yes, on the supply side it will be X, on the load side it will be X plus, as you've said, 0.45. It's worth recording because, again, as Dan says, very good information for the next person who comes along, because otherwise they won't understand why. It's not actually generating a problem normally, because don't forget, even that 0.45 lift with a 30 milliamp RCD, you've got 1667, so it shouldn't create a problem for you. You have actually said with this your ZS isn't being met, so I'm not too sure about that, because if you're that close to the ZS of an RCD, I think you need to do some investigation as to why. But generally, I would say it doesn't affect, but it's something worth noting. It were some manufacturers specific, so it's not every manufacturer, and I think even within manufacturers' ranges, it wasn't every type of RCD. But yeah, it's not uncommon. But yeah, worthy of a little bit of a note, just so that next time you go back, you're reminded and you can check that it's not getting any worse. And be also useful for the next person that comes along, because you don't want to be accused of not having noted it. So yeah, it's always good. Any comments on that, Dan?
Yeah, no, definitely manufacturer specific. Some have noted up to 0.5 RC uplift as a result. Again, just be aware of it. Test either side of it, make a note of it, make it clear, because if it is recorded, others might think, why is it so high? So again, just informing them that you do think there's a bit of an RC uplift issue on that particular RCD. Okay,
we're coming to the end again. We've got one more question that we'll take. There's no wire webinar this Wednesday, but there is one on the following Wednesday, which will be the 24th. So that's another one in our series on test and inspection. So that will be very useful. They've been very popular. I think we've been getting sort of 700 plus people watching those live, and then far more afterwards watching them on demand. So they're being seen as a very useful series. We'll finish up tonight with a good question that we often get asked. So if in a single circuit, the circuit is made up of a number of different types of cable and a number of different conductor sizes. For example, perhaps to achieve a volt drop requirement, or maybe for a specific connection method, then should the distribution board schedule and the schedule of test results, should we record all the cable types and sizes used in the circuit? So what would your thoughts be on that, Dan?
Again, I get this one quite a lot actually on assessments. Not necessarily. There's many ways of doing it, Sam. You could record the most onerous condition, and then on a continuation page of the installation cert, then add further notes about that particular circuit and put X, Y, and Z, how it changes conductor sizes and cable type, etc. Again, to inform anybody after.
Yeah.
They follow the installation.
Yeah, so it's always good. It can be confusing for the next person if you record, for example, just the most onerous, and that's not the one that leaves the board. So again, it's all good, valuable information for the next person, or for you when you go back in a while after you've worked on other and perhaps forgot about this installation. So yeah, again, very, very useful information. Okay, we'll call a halt to that for tonight. Another one of those. I'm always amazed at how quickly these half hours go. What did you think, Dan? I did tell you it was going to be the fastest half hour of your day.
A lot, Sam, to be fair. It's so quick. You did say it goes fast. I'm like, no, thank you. Thank you for having me this evening. I've really enjoyed it, and appreciate it. So thank you.
No, it's good. Always good to speak to you, Dan, and we'll no doubt see you again. Thanks everyone in the chat room as well. Really great questions to get us going, and I see that you're helping each other out as well, which is always really good to see. So thank you again, and hopefully you can join us again next Monday night. Okay.
Have a good evening all.
Cheers.
Yeah.